Star Trek, Starfleet Academy, Chapter 7. 2 not particularly good days later, I was back in Rotorot's office, and Rotorot wasn't even there. Captain Sulu was plenty there, though.
"What's going on, Forrester? Cadet McGear's simulator scores have dropped now. One day it's Corin, then it's Brady, and now it's McGear. You running a tag team program?"
No, sir. Her whole family died on Bicea, as you know, and she refused to take a leave of absence. Am I authorized to order her to do that, sir?
"No, you're not."
He was enjoying this. I could just tell that he was.
"Your team started out with a favorable boost from Captain Kirk, but believe me, that can be lost. You're finding out about the hardest part of command. Outside influences affecting your crew. You'll have to handle it. If this happened to her out in space on a starship, you'd still have to deal with it and get her to do her job. It's as much a test for you as it is for her. That's the way the Academy sees this."
That's asking a lot of me, sir. Oh, why did I say that? Her emotional condition is out of my hands, sir. I tried again, but that one wasn't much better. Sulu nodded, at first seeming to agree with me, but somehow I didn't believe that.
"Maybe neither of you are in the right school,"
he said after a pause. He wasn't speaking harshly, but his words were scrubbing my skin off. "Sir," I began hesitantly, "has the Academy been paying attention to the activities of a campus group called the Vanguard?"
"Not particularly. Why?"
"I was just wondering if those speeches constitute insubordination."
"We do discourage political involvement for cadets, but as long as they do their duty, their politics are their own affair."
"Isn't it a threat to discipline?" I asked.
"Discipline always suffers when a crewman doesn't believe in what he's doing. You can't let others affect your crew. You have to be the compass of your own crew. Know what your own beliefs are, and they'll take their strength from you."
Me again.
"Commander Chekhov's expecting you and Mr. Sturek in the bridge simulator,"
Captain Sulu went on, and evidently that other subject was done with.
"There's a new program we want to test run before we incorporate it into the general schedule. Captain Kirk's idea."
"Yes, sir," I said, trying to refocus. "I assisted Commander Chekhov this morning installing the program. I've arranged to meet Sturek there, sir."
"And I'll be there too. Dismissed."
How could he say something so politely and easily and still have it come out like a threat? Just what seminar taught that little trick?
"Aye, sir."
In the corridor again, just as mystified as the last time. There was a pattern here. Gear up for the simulator, this time with just Sturek and me, just a test run to make sure the graphics were online and a shot would go where it was aimed. Right now, that was all I wanted to do. Sit down and start shooting. Get it all out. Kill a couple of CGIs. Maybe if I got the formulations just right, Frank Milan's face would be etched on a whole plate. What a target. The walk across Academy grounds to Simulator Dome was head-clearing, but provided no answers for me. Was this what command would be like? My crew watches each other die, then has to shake off the grief and keep working? In space, there was no time for mourning. I hurried to the main Starship Bridge simulator and rushed into the entrance quickly enough to surprise the door panels and get a bump on the elbow for it. Sturek crouched at the main long-range sensor trunk on the upper deck, but there was no one else in sight. Oh, good, I thought I was late. "You are!" Commander Chekhov appeared from under the helm. Hadn't seen him. "Where have you been?" he asked. Commander, I'm sorry, sir. No excuses, sir. I've loaded up the program, and you boys will try it out as soon as Captain Sulu gets here. Recalibrating my brain at warp speed. Alright, not quite at warp speed, but still recalibrating. I nodded and met Sturrock's gaze. Aye, sir, we're ready. Good. Chekhov stood up. Take positions at... The lift doors opened again, and Captain Sulu entered in the middle of a conversation with James T. Kirk. My feet froze. I couldn't move my feet. What was wrong with my boots? Because I'm shipping out on the 30th of this month, James Kirk was saying.
It's just one Deep Nebula navigation class, Sulu protested. It was your idea in the first place. At least launch the seminar.
They came onto the bridge and paused on the upper deck. 2 weeks and that's it, Kirk said. Get ready to sign some releases. Releases?
Well, you don't want to be held responsible, do you?
Leaving Captain Sulu with that thought. Kirk scanned the bridge and a touch of nostalgia warmed his ruddy cheeks. Then he looked at Chekhov. Gentlemen, is it loaded up? Ready now, sir, the commander said. Would you like to see the cadets attempt the action? Kirk almost said yes and glanced around and seemed to be assessing the presence of his 2 former bridge officers and Sturrock and me. What was he thinking about? He stepped down to the command deck, circled the captain's chair, touched it, ran his hands along the back and down the arm. A chill skittered across my shoulder as if I were that chair, feeling the warmth of his reminiscence and the challenge of his presence. Oh my. Sulu and Chekhov both grinned sentimentally, and Sturrock looked at me for just an instant. We were witnessing a precious, fleeting moment. James Kirk gazed at the captain's chair. Why should the cadets have all the fun? He asked. Then he looked at Sulu and Chekhov in turn. I always wanted to have a second crack at this. What do you say, gentlemen? A grin broke across Sulu's face that lit up the whole bridge. The place actually got bright. Chekhov nodded firmly at his former commander and caught the enthusiasm. Why not? It's all yours, sir. All hands, Kirk said, his voice suddenly ringing. Take your posts. What? I figured I'd better move, so I took the helm. It was closest. Sturrock dropped from the upper starboard deck and landed in the navigation chair. That was where we'd have to sit if we were going to run the program. A form appeared at my side and another in my periphery beside Sturrock. We both looked up, and at our sides stood Sulu and Chekhov. Sulu was looking down at me. Chekhov was looking at Sturrock. Well, looking didn't exactly describe it. What's wrong? Captain Kirk asked impatiently. Chekhov fanned his arms at me and Sturrock. They're in our seats. Kirk settled into the command chair. Then you can be Scotty. Sulu, you can be Spock. I can do this without the 2 of you, but I need Scotty and Spock.
Indeed.
Captain Sulu puffed up like I didn't think he could, raised his chin, and struck a pose long enough to get that word out. Aye, aye, Captain, sir. Chekhov rolled some kind of accent over the accent he already had. This was crazy. We knew who they were talking about, of course, but why were they? Spock, the famous Vulcan first officer who had set a pattern for his entire species by entering Starfleet and gaining acclaim at James Kirk's side. Captain of Engineering Montgomery Scott. His innovations at deep space warp engineering had provided me with something to use to smack Robin around. The legendary crew of senior officers were lesson number 1 for any Starfleet cadet. And here I was sitting in the helm chair, and behind me was Captain James T. Kirk, the prototype of Starfleet tenacity, a man who'd been known to work every advantage until it cracked, and he wanted to play a simulator game. And Sturrock surveyed me briefly from the nav seat. He didn't know what was going on either. I flinched when the bridge around us surged to life and began to hum and click with electrical activity. Chekhov must have turned it on from up there. He was standing now at the engineering station, And Sulu had climbed up to the science console and was standing there with his arms folded and one eyebrow up. Didn't make any sense. I glanced around at Captain Kirk just to see if these antics were some kind of joke, and he pointed at me. "You be Sulu," he ordered, then pointed at Sturek. "And you be Chekhov. I know it's asking a lot, but Academy cadets are supposed to be able to endure anything." He settled deep into the command chair, relishing the feeling. "Mr. Spock," he began, his voice ringing. "Implement program Monad 1701. "Implementing, Captain," Sulu responded with an unrecognizable lilt. He worked the science board, and on several subsystems monitors, and the main screen scenes popped up that I didn't recognize. Old-style views of space and ship motion, and there were sounds I'd never heard before, somehow more musical than usual bridge noises. A jolt of nostalgia hit me. All this seemed familiar, and it felt right. "Navigator," Kirk said, "make your course 650 Mark II. Sturek glanced at me again. He was confused, too, and worried. 650 Mark II laid in, Captain, he said. "Warp factor 5, Helm." My turn. "Warp factor 5, sir." Steady as she goes. A shiver ran my spine and a grin cracked across my face. I was really doing this. Captain James Kirk was right here. The Captain James Kirk was giving me orders. I'd gotten a steady as she goes from James T. Kirk. When my board changed in front of me, I almost forgot to relay the change. Captain Shields just snapped on, something coming in at multi-warp speeds. "Yellow alert," Captain said, boiling everything down to a single action. "Yellow alert," I responded, quite properly, if I did say so myself, and the bridge panels changed to flashing amber. "Evasive maneuvers, Mr. Sulu," Kirk added. I parted my lips and said, "Evasive maneuvers." Had my voice changed? I looked at the upper deck. Captain Sulu had said the same thing at the same time. Everybody paused, looked at everybody else, and Sulu shrugged. "Habit," he threw in. Kirk bobbed his brows once and shrugged back. "Extremely powerful bolt of energy coming in, Captain," Sulu said then, speaking rather evenly and fluidly, but with a sense of spirit. Was that how the famous Mr. Spock sounded? Mr. Scott," Kirk spoke up, "I need full shields." "Captain," Chekhov gulped from the upper engineering station, "I don't ken if we have the power." I gaped at Sturek. What was that supposed to be? Kirk cranked around in his chair. "He wouldn't say that. We haven't been hit yet." "Oh, right." Chekhov looked at his board and seemed to be enjoying himself. "I'll give it all I got, sir." On the main screen, a white globular bolt rushed toward the ship, getting bigger and brighter like a gigantic water balloon rolling toward us. "It's going to hit," I called out, hoping I was speaking up at the right moment. The bolt overtook the whole view screen and slam! The simulator bridge heaved up under us and shook to one side. At engineering, Chekhov kicked over the nearest chair. Sulu jumped down from the science deck and spun the captain's chair halfway around, spinning Kirk right out of it. Kirk stuck his foot out sideways and knocked my chair out from under me. All I saw as I went down was Sturek's completely baffled face and the delight of Sulu's mischievous expression. Why were they beating us up? "Pagoda!" Chekhov crowed from somewhere inside a plume of exhaust from a blown console. "That's Irish," Kirk scolded. Chekhov smiled and kept up that weird accent on accent. "Shields down to 40%, sir." Defensively, Kirk glowered at the main screen. "Not on the first hit they weren't," he said derisively. "Not that ship." Captain Sulu climbed back to the upper deck and secured his posture in Spock form.
"We should be dead within moments. Undoubtedly, this is Ensign Chekhov's fault."
The ship shook under us again as I tried to get back into my toppled seat. "Helm, I said evasive maneuvers," Kirk snapped. "We're losing power, sir," I told him. "Another bolt approaching, Captain," Chekhov said with great agitation. Mr. Sulu is steering us right into them. The new hit slammed the bridge with shock waves. Unimpressed, Kirk simply said, "Armed torpedoes 1 and 2. Then he paused and looked around fitfully, troubled. "Something's missing," he murmured. I was looking at him, but had no idea what he could possibly be talking about. Sulu looked too, but didn't seem to have the answer either, which made me feel a little less clumsy. "Oh, yes." Kirk suddenly leaned to one side as if addressing himself, and struck an attitude I didn't recognize. "But, Jim, you can't just open fire on an unknown spacecraft," he rasped, and shifted to the other side of the chair. "Mind your business, Bones. I'm a captain, not a social worker. Mr. Chekhov, fire torpedoes." Sturrock was completely paralyzed. The antics of the senior officers were utterly mystifying to him, and even as I was beginning to get into it, he was losing ground. I cuffed him in the elbow, which shook him enough so that he remembered he was Chekhov. He pawed his console and breathlessly responded, "Torpedoes away, sir." Whoosh, whoosh. A deadly sound, even in the simulator. Full power photon torpedoes jetting into space. Perfect killing machines with the bottled power of a solar flare. Made me wince. Imagine if those were real. Piloting the starship in the presence of all the incarnations of the famous first crew, I indulged in a shiver of thrill and played my console as if I could sound a fanfare with it.
"Another bolt coming in, Captain," Sulu droned. "Quite illogical. I may throw up."
"Logic my eye, Mr. Spock," Kirk tossed over. "Mr. Chekhov, give me retreat coordinates." Sturrock glanced at him, then worked his board. I turned halfway around. "Retreat, sir? That's not in the program." His amber eyes hit me and skewered in. "Did I ask you?" "No, sir." "Retreat heading laid in, sir," Sturrock said. "Helm, retreat, warp factor 6. Again I looked around. "Sir, those bolts are coming in at warp 15. We can't outrun them." He actually crossed his legs and tilted his head at me. "Are you questioning your captain's orders, cadet?" As if I'd been punched, I gulped. "No, sir. Warp factor 6, retreat heading." "Navigator, effect emergency warp core dump on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark!" Taken by surprise, Sturrock fumbled briefly, then found the tie-ins. The whole bridge bumped hard, almost throwing me from my chair. Boom! All screens showed a big greenish blast of contamination and every kind of crud imaginable. The computers rushed to calculate the impact, then jolted us with a second flush of shock effect. That was fun. Victory fanfare played over the sound system. The music of a technical win he'd beaten the simulator. Sulu came forward on the upper deck, and Chekhov appeared in my periphery on the port side. "It's dead, Jim," they both cried out. At the same time, with the same inflection. How did they know to do that? James Kirk sank back in the command chair and moaned. Pathetic. Sturrock was looking at his controls as if they'd grown pointed ears. The antimatter dump caused an energy flushback. Marvelous. I abandoned my board and swung around to Kirk. "You did it, sir." He gave a little shrug. "I had 30 years to figure it out. I would never think to retreat. Better learn." He dismissed me as easily as that and glanced warmly around the bridge. "Thank you, gentlemen. We'll have to meet like this again sometime." As Sulu and Chekhov beamed at him happily, James Kirk rose from his command chair, then caressed the arm of the chair as if shaking hands with an old friend. For a moment, neither Sturrock nor I dared disturb his reverie. He'd just given us a gift, and to rupture his moment of peace would have been improper. As I watched one of the most famous men in Federation history move about only steps from me, I sensed a loneliness no one had ever mentioned. Were captains lonely? He pulled himself away from the chair in one of the saddest moments of strength I'd ever witnessed, and headed for the upper deck lift doors and didn't look back. I paused, waiting for him to cast one last glance, but he didn't. In those 4 or 5 seconds, I learned a hard lesson. "Captain," pushing out of my chair. I hurried to the upper deck so he wouldn't have to look down again. He turned. Question? What it's like, I began, when the ships out there are really trying to kill you. James Kirk, the unexploitable, glanced at Captain Sulu, then at Commander Chekhov, down at Sturek through a cloud of fritzing smoke, and finally back at me. Harnessed anticipation crossed between the two of us. You'll find out, he said. Chapter 8. Corin, you have to figure out some way to shortcut those firing sequences and coordinate them with Janus course plottings. Robin, I don't see any way around you giving us more accurate numbers on the warp core surges. You'll have to shave it down one more decimal point on each of those scales. Sturek, maybe you can help him by trimming the sensor shifts, and I'll concentrate on applying a few of the more advanced strategical maneuvers and making my orders more specific to each degree. Magia, if you could... Magia? Yes? Are you listening? Of course. Why wouldn't I be? It sounded all right when she said it fast, but she'd been looking at the view screen, and Frank Milan and his crew were over there. I decided to go over our latest simulation exercises in the cadet lounge because, well, I didn't have a very good reason, except they seemed to act more at ease in here than anywhere else, and I needed them to be at ease with each other for at least 10 minutes a day. At least they'd be paying attention to me, or so I thought. And it was cool in here, something we needed after a very hot day. We'd spent all morning in the simulator, then noon cleaning up what we'd done all morning, then all afternoon on the cross-country obstacle course carrying water-soaked logs over our heads. That was the Academy's way of expanding our minds while destroying our bodies. Then, of course, we had to write up reports of how it felt and analyze our own mistakes. And for free time, which was now, we got to analyze our miserable destruction of the simulator. A well-rounded day, all in all. The Starfleet news service was playing on the big screen again, running through the day's business as it pertained to Starfleet, and every other story had something to do with the activity. All right, slaughter on Bicea Colony. Scheduling at the Academy was very tight. We had full weekdays from reveille at 0600 to evening drills, and only after showers and study hours could we break to the lounge. So that's what almost everybody did, at least twice a week. The lounge building not only housed the lounge, but the Olympic pool, the indoor track, and an arcade of hand-eye coordination games. Even when we weren't training, we still were. And besides, my favorite game was called Tron. Tron was a great game. Every cadet knew that. Yeah, and of course, the lounge was where we could just sit and stare at a great big screen. And if we didn't want to look at the screen, we could look at Frank Milan. Another command decision I could polish and hang on my barrack wall. My nerves were still buzzing from those hot-wired minutes at James Kirk's helm, making it torture to level out and concentrate on keeping my crew banded together. After every surge of thrill came a shudder borne up by those last three words he'd left me with. You'll find out. Somehow he had managed to inspire me and terrify me in the same breath. Listen to this. I recognized the voice first, but I knew that tone and instantly looked up at the wide screen. A huge flock of cadets was watching now, and Frank Milan and his troglodyte troopers were right up front. On the screen, Commandant Rotorot was making another announcement, and the President of the Federation has issued a formal apology to the Klingons over Starfleet's aggressive actions as incurred by the USS Sentinel. The Klingon High Council accepted that the exchange of weapons fire was based upon a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, Frank Milan roared. The Federation sold out Starfleet. They apologized to those butchers. That's pretty extreme, Milan, I said, loudly enough for most of the cadets to hear. Okay, I'd probably end up with my spinal column holding up one end of the volleyball net. But they ought to hear a dissenting opinion from someplace, right? At least hear it. Face it, I added. You're jumping to conclusions. Federation isn't ready to blame the Klingons for Bysea. Easy talk from somebody who won't get involved, Magia coldly accused. Milan moved through the crowd and stood beside Magia's chair.
You ought to stick up for your own crewmate at least, Forrester. The Federation's a pack of wimps, allowing the Klingons to massacre our families.
That theory doesn't hold water, I told him. Klingon colonies on the neutral zone are being attacked too. He pointed at me.
Those are just rumors, started by the Klingons to cover their tracks.
He started to say something else, but Captain Sulu's voice came over the comm.
Cadet Milan, report with your crew to the planetarium.
Opening the communicator, he said,
Milan here. Aye, sir.
And waved for his crew to gather. In the few seconds it took to assemble them, he patted Magia on the shoulder.
We're behind you, even if your own crew isn't.
Thank you, Frank, she said. Magia, I attempted. Our futures are on the line. We've got our own work to worry about, and I want you to ignore what he's saying. Ignoring things got my family killed. Her voice was as flat as the floor, cooler than Sturek could even manage. I know how to survive.
Yeah, she knows,
Milan agreed. He took her arm and led her out of the lounge, flocked by his training crew and a couple of other crews.
Forrester, keep your losers away from us.
The lounge fell into a tense peace, and on the big screen was a report about the Academy Marching Musical Corps. There went Milan, and Magia was with him. That lady is going to blow like a volcano one of these days, Corin said, following them out with his gaze. I'm worried about her, Jana admitted. Robin glanced furtively at each of us. Maybe she's just taking it really well. She's so under control. That's not under control, I told him. That's over control, and I don't think it'll hold. Corin leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. I got my scores up, and Robin got his up, and now we got this. You better come up with something to break her out of it, he suggested, or all our hard work is going right out the airlock. We can't let her fall apart, Jana said. Beside her, Sturek nodded, but said nothing. She won't fall apart, I assured, as if I knew. Jana shot me a warning glare. Andorians are prickly, David. This Ice Queen act is bizarre. She's a diplomat's daughter, I tried. Maybe she's just bearing up. She's paying a price, Corin said. We're all going to pay it if we don't get her to break... We're all going to pay it if we don't get her to break out. Now my communicator chirped, and Commander Chekhov's voice made a terse order. Cadet Forrester, report to the Science Hub, Delta Tango. I flipped open the communicator. Forrester acknowledged. Corin was still looking at me. They all were. Spreading my hands, I complained. Come on! I'm a team commander, not a priest. She just needs an excuse to blow off steam, Jan said. You could think of something, couldn't you? Corin cuffed me in the knee. Where's that command thinking, huh? Sturek buffeted the moment with a loaded expression of sympathy and doubt. Jana kept glaring at me. Robin's eyes were wide with anticipation. Yeah, where was it? Lab Delta Tango was in the Cornwell Systems Analysis Building. And getting there across the breadth of the Academy grounds sucked up a good 10 minutes, all of which were clogged with everything from therapy to a good slap for Magia. What did I know about the psychological repercussions of bottled grief? I'd never even had a pet cat die. My cat was 18 and still mousing. I hurried down the stark white corridor of the Cisan building and went all the way to Lab Delta Zebra before I realized I had gone too far. Doubling back, I broke into a run and surged through the doors of Delta Tango at full skid. And inside, well, of course, was Captain Kirk. Why not? Commander Chekhov was there too. They both looked up in time to see me bump into a sink. Nice going, Grace. Good morning, Captain, I blurted to cover my stumble. Morning, Commander. Morning, Kirk responded. You in the mood for a privilege, Forrester? Oh, at your service, sir. Come over here. If only I could get there without skinning a knee. He held out a computer cartridge. I've got something that's got to stay in this room. This isn't Academy business. This is Starfleet business. Top security classification. Understood? I looked at Chekhov, but he wasn't offering any clues. His eyes were gleaming, though, as if he was proud of me. A voice in the back of my head kept murmuring, "Garbage scow, garbage scow." "Top security, sir?" I asked. "You mean command cadets only?" "I mean Starfleet senior flight officers only," Captain Kirk corrected, and that was a heck of a correction. He leaped about as far from cadets as he could without bringing in the Admiralty. "This is for real captains to practice on, cadet." Real captains practicing. The whole idea hit me with unexpected impact. I'd always imagined the learning process ended with command of a ship. Guess not. Kirk was standing there waiting. So was Chekhov. Next move seemed to be mine. "Understood very clearly, sir," I told him with what I hoped was a decisive tone. "You've been assisting Mr. Chekhov with the installation of the new simulator matrices. I want you to help him with this one and make it a priority." He handed me the computer cartridge. "These are the design and weaponry specs on a new Klingon heavy cruiser. I want you to incorporate them into a simulator program and give it a top security code status with the access code Sultan's Great Day." The cartridge was warm in my hand. I looked at it rather foolishly. Sultan's Great Day. Aye, sir, Captain. Why are we wargaming a ship that belongs to an empire we're trying to make peace with? And why use the Academy simulator instead of the real starships? He eyed me with a dangerous sidelong gaze. Oh, ouch. "Because there are possibilities we need to prepare for that we shouldn't look like we're preparing for," he said. "Carry on, Mr. Forrester." He glanced at Chekhov one more time, then strode with great self-satisfaction toward the door and out into the corridor. Had Magia been right all along? Was Starfleet preparing us for war, even as the Federation jockeyed for passivity? Was one a cover for the other? "What's wrong with you today?" Chekhov sidled toward me. "Oh, a few problems with my crew, sir." "Skill?" he asked. "Technical? Station postings?" Personal, sir." "Ah, there's no manual for that." "No, sir." "Trouble with your Vulcan? Sturak?" "Oh, no, sir. Why do you ask?" "Sometimes there's trouble with Vulcans," he said, with a wise shrug that explained exactly nothing. My shoulder actually went up a notch, trying to imitate that shrug. Must be some kind of officer's secret shrug. "Your Mr. Sturek is in Lab Delta, India right now," Chekhov told me. "He's working on fragments from the ship that attacked Baisia." Suddenly interested, I took a rather impolite step toward him. "I thought it was a Klingon ship." That shrug again. "We have the fragments. Might as well analyze them." "Commander, how did we get fragments of a ship that got away?" "Captain Kirk went out yesterday and scoured the atmosphere and the ruins of the settlement. He found bits of the attack ship broken off by planetary defenses. There's no match to any metallurgy on the planet, so we're going to the next step." "Why Sturek?" I asked. "Why use cadets at all on something this big?" "Because it's big," he answered cryptically. "No one knows the research is being done here. We can have peace and quiet and keep our eyes on you. And because Captain Kirk trusts Vulcans, he's funny that way. Now, specifically with your crewmen, what's the trouble?" For a moment I paused, not knowing whether he was asking as a commander or as an advisor. I'd had both, but they were always different people. What was his role here at command school? Were the courtesies different? Well, after all, he did ask, didn't he? "My communications specialist lost her family in the Baisia attack. It's eating her inside out, but she's not letting us help. She's just going on with her training as if nothing happened. It's a lot harder to manage a crew than it looked in the manuals." "Of course," Chekhov allowed. "Starfleet gives most challenging cadets to the most capable command schools. Bringing out the best in them will bring out the best in you. It's an old Russian technique. Captain Kirk saw something in you, and something in the way your team acted out their roles during the mock terrorist attack. I've seen him do that before, but only twice in all these years. One of those command cadets is now a fleet starship first officer, and his entire training crew is still with him. The other team, they washed out. All of them together. Is there something wrong with the temperature control in here? You're saying, I began, that my crew has no options. We stay together and deal with whatever comes, sink or swim. Smart boy. I shook my head. But I don't know what to do. I can handle the technical aspects of their work, but how do I break through shells like the one McGee is putting up around herself? Chekhov leaned on the sink counter and held up an illustrative finger. Before I joined the crew of the Enterprise, I served aboard a survey ship with a commanding officer like that. Very hot temper, but she thought getting angry was unprofessional. As long as she exploded from time to time, she was the most charming person on board. If she held back, if you want to help your communications officer, get her to express herself outside the simulator. I can't pick a fight with her, sir. It's against regulations. It's against just... And the crew's personality problems aren't really the commander's domain, are they? Everything that happens on the ship is the commander's domain. A captain who pays attention to the temperament and morale of his crew. Count on that crew when he really needs them. A captain who pushes his crew out of the nest will have a crew who really flies. Another old Russian saying. Casting him a pathetic, mournful sort of look, I muttered, Old Russians never had to deal with Andorians. He shrugged. Suit yourself. If you've made it to command school, you've probably made someone mad before, so do it again. Thank you, sir. Thank me after your scores go up. Let's get this heavy cruiser onto the simulator. We're going to need it. Pushing off the counter, he tapped the cartridge I was holding. The cartridge lay in my hand passively, stirring curious questions and reaching out much farther than this lab. A Klingon warship, different from those before it. A new heavy cruiser that the Klingons shouldn't even be building, given the stipulations of the treaty with the Federation. Codenamed Sultan's Great Day. I held it up. Sir, does this mean the Klingons are Starfleet's next target? Chekhov strode toward the computer complex in the middle of the lab. Without looking back at me, he waved a hand. Never mind what it means. Well, installing the new Klingon heavy cruiser program took the entire rest of the day and half the night, with just the commander and me working on it. We couldn't ask for help because the whole thing was classified. The rest of the night I barely slept, tortured by night thoughts of Klingons and failure, Megia and war, command and washing out. When reveille sounded, I was relieved to roll out and put an end to the long, jumbled hours. Drill, breakfast, and simulator, and no sign of Sturek. He's always present at drill and breakfast, but not today. Was he still in the lab working on those ship fragments? Maybe that was why Captain Kirk liked Vulcan's stamina. I dragged myself to the main bridge simulator and my team was already there, which I was glad to note. As a commander, I'd rather have been last to arrive than first and have to scoop up my crew from 6 different places. Corin was at his helm, playing with the new programming. Jana was on her knees at the base of her navigation console, closing the access panel. Over at engineering, Robin played his board like a piano, though I had no idea what he was doing since we hadn't started yet. At least he seemed more contented than the last time I'd seen him. Megia hovered over the science station, which would have been Sturek's place if he'd been here. That was her job, take over science if the science officer went down, or fainted, or got a cramp, or something. Okay, crew, I greeted them, pushing off my fatigue. Ready to take on the Klingons? Megia turned. I wish it wasn't just a simulation. I'd like to pulverize them for real. Rather than dropping to the command deck, I moved along the upper deck toward her. I don't like that attitude, Megia. This isn't doing you any good. What isn't? Her brows came down. As long as you act this way, you're putting us all at risk, and I want you to stop. Get help, or do whatever it takes. Going into missions with suppressed rage endangers us all. This is fake. She swept her hand along the science console. It's a simulator. Someday it'll be real, I provoked. And you'll kill us all. A purple vein hardened on her neck. Are you trying to start a fight? You're an Andorian. You haven't got the guts for a fight. I've done nothing to endanger our standings. The space between us closed. I think you have. Start the simulator and I'll show you there's no cause to worry. We'll start when I'm satisfied we can all work at peak efficiency and not a moment before. You want efficiency? Her eyes flared and her antennae went stiff and straight. She reared back and let fly a purposeful punch. Awkward, but plenty effective as her sharp fist drove into my stomach. Oh! Oh! I choked and doubled over. I braced for a slap in the jaw. The punch drove the air from my lungs and I slid to one knee. Magia! Jana dropped what she was doing and vaulted to the upper deck where she held Magia back. Corin knelt beside me. Wow. David, you okay? Jana, Magia gulped. Let go of me. As he kept me from toppling over, Corin looked up at her. Why don't you leave him alone? You're losing control. It's okay, Jeff, I gasped. Wasn't really Magia doing the hitting. Magia pulled out of Jana's grasp and knelt in front of me. David, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hit you. As I blinked at her through watery eyes, I saw the sheath of coldness peel off, revealing a pain in her eyes and regret in her manner. I've been bottling up, she said. I never thought I'd take it out on anyone. Feel better now? I asked. She shook her head and sighed. I don't know. She and Corin helped me to my feet, and Corin said, Can I hit you now? Maybe we can bring up my scores too.